then let's begin today's lecture, JavaScript 2 on the DOM. Before we do so, let's get started and let's set up for some live coding. All right. Can everyone see my screen?
Yeah.
All right. Excellent. Feel free to follow along. If you do follow along, it'll just be easier to experiment with by yourself as well as just get a hang of all of this. But you can also see me code. Either way, we're going to begin with getting a folder ready. Then we're going to go ahead, open our terminal. And we're going to navigate all the way over to this folder. There we go. And now we can open it in whatever code editor you wish to do so in. I'll just open this in VS Code. All right, so what we're going to do today is we're going to start with adding some responsiveness to any website that we start developing. So as you can see here, I got my WDB folder on the side. I'm just going to add a index.html to it, which shouldn't take this long. Excuse me, I've changed my mind. I'm not going to use VS Code after all. Well, maybe. Let's see. Never mind. Okay. We've started with an index.html file, and now let's do the classic HTML business. Set up our HTML tree, declare our doc type to be HTML, get a head, get a body, get a title in there. Go. And hello world. The most basic HTML template possible. All right, now we're gonna, of course, go back to our folder and open it up. So we're just gonna double click it here, and it should be open. There we go. There we go. Hello world right here, JavaScript 2 right there, exactly how we want it. Any questions about any of this? Okay, and now we're gonna go ahead and add a little bit of JavaScript to this HTML. And the way we do that is through these script tags. Quick note, I am going to inline a lot of JavaScript in this index.html file so that everything is just in one file and it's easy to live code with it. Preferably, what you should do in your program is have an index.html and a Java or an index.js file to keep your languages separate. All right, and let's do something pretty simple. Follow console. All right. So last week was it? We covered some intro to JavaScript stuff. Here we go. On our console, we see hello console. And on our web page here, we see hello world. All right. There's a few other things you can do. Console.log, as a reminder, is JavaScript's version of print. Here we go. And now it should also print 7 right here. Let's also write a function func that goes ahead and prints hello function. And for fullness, essentially, we're going to write one more format of this. There we go. Don't forget the exclamation point. And we're going to call this func2, and we're going to call this func1 to not override any function. And now we're, of course, just going to call both these functions from our main file. Okay, there we go. Console, hello function 2, and let's go ahead and write a func3. That's our arrow function. Oh, we didn't call our func3 yet, so it doesn't display anything. Func3. There we go. Hello arrow function. Right. Everyone kind of comfortable with this from lecture 1? Any questions? Okay. Then I have a question for all of you. What is going to get added here when I write this? Essentially this. What else is going to get added to the terminal? Guesses in the chat is okay. Well, let's find out. Four. And that's the most interesting part about arrow functions. And this is something that will be a pain to debug. So be very careful with this. All right, we just replaced the parentheses with the curly parentheses and undefined. So the point that I was trying to make here is that if you use parentheses around your body of your arrow function, then this is an implicit return. But if you use the curly braces, then there is no implicit return here. It will return an undefined value. Instead, you want to write down return for if you are to use the curly parentheses. And then it will say for. Okay. I'll just call this arrow function nuance to remind us of what's going on here. Okay, questions? Okay, great. So the important thing to note here is that now what we've done through all of this is introduce JavaScript as a language. Today's lecture is going to be an introduction of JavaScript as a tool, JavaScript as a means to manipulate the website that you're building in HTML and CSS. So what we're going to do is we're going to use all of these things that we learned in JavaScript 1, but add a lot of inbuilt APIs and functions in JavaScript and the way it interacts with the rest of HTML. So before we make that leap, any questions about anything we've covered? It'll be a while before we get back to these basics. So if you have any questions, ask them now or forever hold your peace. I'm kidding. You can ask them whatever. Okay, just give me one moment. sorry about that. Let's get into it. What we're going to do now is we're going to start using JavaScript to manipulate things on screen here. The problem is that we don't barely have anything on screen here. So let's add a little bit of embellishment with our HTML basics we learned a while ago. Let's call this tag class h1 object. As we know, they'll blow this up. Our printing is still happening. All right. Now, first we're going to do, and then we're going to understand what is happening and what we do. So stay with me here, because it's going to get confusing and then it's going to get slightly less confusing. So let's go ahead and make a constant variable called tag. Now in the tag, we're going to go through our document and we're going to look using the query selector command, and we're going to look for a class named tag. All right, everyone with me so far? Excellent. In fact, because it's a class, we're going to use the CSS style of labeling which is a dot tag. Okay, now that we have the tag, what we're going to do is we're just going to console.log that tag. Okay, let's see what happens. Uh-oh. Ah, I see. When you use a constant variable, you can't redefine it the way I just did. So we're just going to try that again. Shouldn't be a problem. And look at that. We got our tag element right here printed out on our console. In fact, let me just go ahead and comment all of this out real quick, just so we can have a, oh boy, this is going to be a pain to comment out. There we go. Just so we can have an easier time reading about what's going on. Here we go. Look at that. We have our HTML class. All right, so we've now used JavaScript to go through our document being all of our HTML, and look for the dot tag query in any of our elements, which we found here. So it just gave us the entire element. But now we're going to do something a little bit cool with the element instead of just printing it out. What we're going to do is we're going to go into its style, and inside of its style, we're going to go inside of its background color, and then we're going to say your color is now bright, no, just red. Let's just go basic first. Ready? Boom. Ooh, look at that. We changed things in our HTML using our JavaScript. So before we dive straight into understanding what happened in painful detail, questions?
So since there are two script tags, how does the program know which one to run, or does it run both?
Excellent question. It runs both in the order in which it is written. So it runs this script tag first, and then it runs this script tag. Awesome. Questions? Okay. Feel free to keep asking your questions in the chat, out loud, however you wish to do so. For now, I'm going to start breaking down what's going on here. So what we're going to do is we're going to break down every single word in this entire thing. The first one, of course, being const. This may or may not be something you're already familiar with. Const is just a variable kind in JavaScript. In JavaScript, there's three types of declarations of variables: const, let, and var. And now var is outdated. No one uses var anymore, or you shouldn't use var anymore, rather. So it's just const and let. Const is declaring a value that cannot change once you have declared it. So now that tag is set to whatever this is, tag cannot be changed again. Let is different. Let is changeable values, exactly like how Python variables work, let variables work. But const variables are unchangeable. They are final. so to say, in another language's syntax. Okay, tag is just a variable name. And I'll take a moment to answer a question in the chat. Why is var not used anymore? Great question. Var was like a slightly messier form of let, and I'll explain messy how more towards the end. Let me just quickly make a note of that. Okay, yeah. It was a slightly messier, less intuitive style of let, and let was introduced in ES5, which is the 5th version of JavaScript. And once let was introduced, var is being scaled out, so you will see it oftentimes. But in modern JavaScript, it's preferably not written. Let is used instead. I'll explain why once we kind of finish up understanding DOM, because then it's going to make more sense. Okay. Moving on. What is this document? Well, a document is a global variable. Global variable meaning if you write a script tag anywhere, you can access document from anywhere. It will be available here. It will be available inside of a function. It will be available inside a function, inside a function, inside a function. You will always have access to it. It is a globally available variable that you can use to interact with the HTML and CSS. So basically, the document, this is an object that encapsulates all of the HTML and CSS associated with the JavaScript you're writing. So it's all of this. If I were to go ahead and give a style tag here and write out some style here for everything here, then that would also be part of the document. All right, questions? All right, I'm gonna keep going, but as always, questions always welcome. And anything that's confusing, just keep asking. All right, let's talk about query selector. So the document as an object has a lot of functions inbuilt for it. We'll go through, I think, a bunch of them today. Query selector is one of them. What query selector it does is it takes in a CSS selector, for example, dot tag, and returns the first match. This is extremely interesting and extremely pointful. So imagine you had two things, hello paragraph, called or with the class tag. The first one, you see, turns red because the first one gets this applied to it. The second one does not. Okay. As always, any questions, feel free to interrupt me now. But what is happening here is when we do document.query selector, we are looking through the document with this query in hand and asking, hey, what's the first thing that matches this, starting from the top and heading downwards. And then we find this h1 tag and we see, okay, there we go. We have a dot tag. So we're going to just pick this up and give it back to you. And then tag takes that in and saves that. If you remember when we did console.log tag, that's what we saw. And looky here, the HTML is visible in our print statement. Ooh, that's interesting. Yeah.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Can you call tag again, like the document.query selector tag again, and will it like iterate to the next one, or will it just do the same thing?
Let's try out. There we go. Bada bing, bada boom. Same thing. Yeah, Willie, I hope that answered your question. It will not move forward. Awesome. Okay. Let's see, where were we? Yes, we figured out what the query selector was about. It was returning. So this HTML element, this one thing being an element, is now returned to us. And now we have that in our tag variable. Let me just remove tag2 real quick. Now we have that in our tag variable. Now what we're going to do is we're going to say, take the tag variable, go to its style object, That's a confusing terminology. So basically, the tag variable has like a style inside of it. So go to its style. Then inside of the style, go to the background color and then set that background color to red. Something you'll notice is that this is written as background cap color and not your typical CSS background dash color. That's because JavaScript doesn't allow for that. So it's always camel case in JavaScript, whatever other version it may be in CSS. Okay, and then you go ahead and you set the background color to red. And you can do this for a lot of things. So you can go to the style and you can just set the color, which will set the font color. Let's go ahead and set it to white. Boom. Look at that. It's actually starting to look kind of nice. We can go ahead and give it some padding. So we're going to do style.padding, and we can give it 50 px of padding. And now it should be padded on all sides. Okay, questions? All right. So now that we've played around with the CSS a little bit, let's go ahead and do something more. How about we just change the HTML? We go to the tag and go to its inner text. And in its inner text, we say, your inner text is now goodbye, world. All right. Boom. Now it's changed. Because JavaScript went in there, changed the inner text being this text right here, and set it to goodbye world. A better way of doing this is to set the inner HTML, because you may have nested elements, so you want to change the HTML and not just the text. So preferably use inner HTML over inner text. Same thing. Okay, questions?
Wait, I have a question. So what if you wanted to select a tag and do inner HTML, but replace it with like a bunch of other tags?
Sure. So how about we replace it with a link, src, that goes to web at Berkeley.
No, like if you wanted to, like let's say you wanted to have like a footer across like the whole website, and you had like a placeholder div, and you selected that div and put it into tag, and then try to replace the div with inner HTML. It would be like a really long string, right?
Oh,
Or
no.
would,
No, why not? How about we, so basically, is your idea that you want to put, say, this p tag inside of this h1 tag using JavaScript?
yeah, but just like, you know, like 31 tags all in the same string, like would that work?
All right, yeah. How about we use a for loop? Let's go for it, right? So
I guess that would work, yeah.
So you go for let I equal 0, I is less than equal, or I is less than 31, I plus equals 1. And that iterates through whatever we're going to do 31 times. And now we're going to use tag.innerHTML and just say goodbye and add a \n at the end of it so that we next line. Okay, let's see what happens. Oh no. Well, this is because we're setting inner HTML to goodbye. We're not adding to it. So that's a simple change. Add a plus. Now get ready. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think I've done that before to like do a footer. And for some reason, like once the string got like to a certain length, it just kind of like messed up. So I never thought of using a for loop.
You know what? Let's see if that happens. Seems to do all right, even on big sizes. So it may just be that you're like inserting weird elements together and that's messing things up.
It was like a string literal, like it was like begin quote and then like 30 lines later end quote.
Oh,
Not like
I
in
see.
a for loop. Yeah.
That I can see how that may have messed things up because spacing is weird in HTML. it kind of like eats up the space. So if you try to insert just empty space in HTML, it'll just ignore it. If I can insert comments, okay, there we go. Right, so if I do like a bunch of space, but I added it as HTML, it'll just ignore it. Because it doesn't count space as HTML. Because you could go ahead and do like a, and it would be exactly side by side. So that may be something that may be messing it up, because HTML is space insensitive. It just eats up white space.
Okay, thank you.
No worries. Okay, questions?
I think I just looked it up, and like the limit for how big you can make a single one of the quotations is 4,096 characters.
Oh, okay. I did not know that. Thank you. That's very interesting. Okay. All right. We're gonna jump from here to another part of this course, which is event listeners. So if you have any questions, get them in right now.
Hey, Arushi, not a question, but I just want to say you're doing a great job.
Thank you so much. Lovely having you here. All right, the thumbs up man. Okay. Let us go to the next topic now, event listeners. Now, so yeah, changing HTML and CSS from JavaScript, fun. But that does not a responsive website make. A responsive website requires user input to change the website. So what we'd want to do, for example, is if someone clicks on Hello World, then the color changes to red. Well, we have a way to do that. Let's figure it out. So first of all, we're gonna comment out our shenanigans. There we go. Should have our classic hello world by. Let's remove the by. Get back to normal working order. Here we go. Hello world, paragraph, no prints, lovely. So we're at just one element now. And the way we're gonna do this is, well, first of all, we're gonna go ahead and change H1 to a button so that it's something that is fun to click. And now hello world is a button. Clicking it doesn't do anything yet, but we're going to change that in just a second. Let's start making it do things. So we're going to take tag, and we're going to add an event listener. So it's literally add event listener. The idea behind event listener is that it's listening out for an event to happen, and then it'll do something. The event we're listening out for is, well, when you click. We're looking out for a click to happen on our button right here. And what we do when a click happens, we're going to fire a callback function. This is a bit of a weird terminology, but you'll hear a lot of it over the next few classes. The idea is that you give it a function that runs when the click happens. So I'm going to call this the callback fn, and we're going to end this here. And then we're going to go ahead and, well, let's go ahead and define callback fn. And let's start simple, and let's use arrow functions just for fun. Let's start simple and call this console.log. I was fired. That sounds sadder than I intended it to be, but there we go. Oh no! JavaScript is annoying that way sometimes. It does the Java thing. Move it up. Okay, shouldn't have that error anymore. Lovely. And there we go. This is the smallest iteration of responsiveness we could have built out. So let's try to make it slightly more complicated. Instead of just doing something on the log, let's do an alert, which pops up something like this. Oh, that's something more. What else can we do with this? Well, a lot of things. We'll get to that. But first, let me quickly recap what just happened. On tag, we added an event listener. The event listener looks out for a click. When a click happens, a callback function is fired. The idea behind a callback function being fired is that it's just that this function gets run whenever the click happens. So the click happens, and then this happens. That's it. That's the idea. Questions? Okay, as y'all think of questions, I will remove the variable name and put this in here because that is what you'll see more often than not. And don't worry, don't get confused by this. This is closing the callback function, and this parentheses is closing the add event listener. Just something to keep in mind. There we go. Okay. Let's set up a little bit more of a complicated feedback system just in here, that's all. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to change that's just fun, right? It changes the background color when you click on it. Simple, sweet, responsive system that goes in and changes the background color whenever it's clicked. Now the trick is that it doesn't change back, but that's a problem for another day. Okay, let's go ahead and work on something slightly more complicated. That's input fields. Let's do an input field. This type is text. Class is in. That's about it. And now we have a input bar right here. Writing stuff in it does nothing yet, but we'll change that real quick. How do we change that? Well, first we get our input field inside of our JavaScript. And instead of using query selector this time, let's use another function. It's called getElement by class name. Notice how it's getElements by class name, so it returns a collection, a list. So we'll have to chop that down eventually. What you want to do is you want to get this and just get the 0th element. It's a list of 1, and then let's do a console.log to make sure we're doing something right. Boom. Okay, there we go. Yeah, HTML line 24, HTML line 24. Excellent. All right. Questions about getElements by class name? All right. Let's keep going. So now that we have our input, what do we do with it? Well, let's add an event listener. Whenever input gets a key up, explain what that is in a very quick second. Fire a function. Notice how I'm using a different format of the function writing system. It's not the arrow function, this is the standard function name without giving it a name though. Keep note of that. Console.log. Something was written. Oh, oops. Exclamation point. There we go. Let's just quickly make sure that works. Opened our sources for console. There we go. Aha! Excellent. So now let's quickly go ahead and explain what's going on here. Most of this stuff you are familiar with. Add event listener, just adding some event listener to our input object, which is right here. The function is another callback function just like this one. except that it's the function format instead of the arrow function format. Okay? What is keyup? Now, keyup is another event type. The idea behind keyup is that whenever a key is pressed and then you lift your finger off it, when you lift the finger off, then this is fired. And as you may assume, there is an equivalent key down version as well. So the difference is truly minuscule. One is triggered when there's a key down. The other is triggered when there's a key up. So press down, press up. There's a small gap between them. It matters in some cases. Here, I don't think it matters that much. Okay. Cool. So now we have set up a function that fires back when an input happens. But so what? Who cares? Well, let's set up a place where we can actually write down things about who cares. So now what we're going to do is exactly what is keyed down. We're going to write down somewhere. So what we're going to do is we're going to get this p out tag in our HTML, in our JavaScript, my apologies. And how we're going to do that is exactly this way. In fact, I'm going to give it the ID out because I want to show you one more way of accessing elements, which is document.getElementById, intuitive naming system, and use the ID out, and that should give you this output p element that is empty right now. So let's do a console.log, get the output there. Let's see what happens. Let's fire this up. There we go. P out P. Excellent. And now we want to get somehow the value inside of our input tag. Surprisingly intuitive, believe it or not. It is input.value. Using our input variable, just get the value of the input. Let's try again. There we go. FFE is running one behind. Know how it's running one behind? That's because we're running it on key down. Let's run it on key up. Now it should, yeah, there we go. Oh, that's so nice. Okay, and now finally let's use it in some way, which is we're going to say, take our output, go to its inner HTML, and add to it input.value, and then add a space, and next line at the end of it, just to make it pretty. Remove the console.logs to keep our console very clean. And ready, y'all? I have started writing. Okay, there we go. A dynamic website changing on user input. We're getting to it. We're getting to responsive websites. Okay. Oh, questions. Questions.
What happens if you backspace? Will it also like disappear interactively?
Let's try it. No, it just makes the word smaller, but it keeps console.logging things. Or not, my apologies, adding things to the p tag. Okay, questions? What other actions are similar to kick? Okay, great question. There's so many actions. There's click, key up, key down, submit, press. In fact, let me see if I can event listener actions. JavaScript. Why rely on memory when we can look it up? And as I look it up, feel free to think of more questions that I can look up as well. Oh no, okay, it doesn't exist here. Let's look it up somewhere else. Ah, there we go. Yeah. So there's all of these. You can do it after an animation is starting, after the document is getting unloaded. We'll talk about that hopefully in one more lecture. If a change happens, so if an input changes, then you can get this triggered. You can also trigger it when a copy happens, a cut happens, a drag happens, a drop happens, an error happens. Focus is when you click on something and it gets clicked on if it's clickable. For example, when we're working on this right here, if I click on this, this is focused now. So that can be an event reaction. There's just so many things. Mouse movements, opening things, selecting things, touchpad movement. Oh, phew. It's just more than I can memorize and more than you need to. But basically anything you can imagine happening has an event attached to it. So great question. Thank you. Oh, can you define custom ones? No, I do not believe with add event listener you can define custom events. I'm sorry, please back it out there, but I do not believe you can define custom events. No. Okay. Let's see. Right. There's one more thing that I potentially want to do. Which is a change feature. All right. So what we just did here is instead of doing key up or key down, I did change. So if the value changes, then this gets triggered. If the value of the input box changes, that is. And then what we did was we basically, again, took the output element, which is this right here. But instead of adding or deleting anything, what I did was I just set the input value to be background color. Now this may go extremely bad, extremely good. I don't know. Let's try it out. Okay, let's reload. Now, change has a special property where it only gets triggered when you hit enter. So what happened was that it didn't take my R, didn't take my RE, but when I hit RED and I hit enter, it changed the color to red. I can do it again, and again, and think again, and again, and again, and again, and I'll stop there. So there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with event listeners and just manipulating the DOM. Okay. I've been mentioning the DOM for a while, so I'll circle back to talking for like a really quick second about what the DOM is. The DOM is the document object model. The idea behind it is, of course, first that there is a big document object that encapsulates everything, and then you can go into it and get these smaller HTML elements and play with them. But the idea is also that every HTML element is an object. Now that's a tricky one, so stick with me here. But this tag is an object. This tag object has a field, a property of style. So if you remember classes from any language you want, we had these like, let me write Python. There we go. We had these instance variables, global variables, what are we going to call them? Like style, and then they were some value. This is that style of thing for the object of tag. And the style, oh, here's where it gets complicated. The style is also an object that has a field called background color. Now the background color is a string. So, it stops there. But the document object model is first and foremost an object model, where most everything is an object inside of an object inside of an object inside of an object. If that doesn't make sense, don't worry about it. Ignore what I said and just have fun using these functions. You don't need to know this, but I think it helps with understanding at a deeper level just a little bit. That everything is an object. So you can do document.querySelector, but then you could also have done tag.querySelector, and that should also be okay. And you could have done tag.getElement by class name and getElement by tag name and getElement by ID, and all that should be okay as well. Because everything is an object that has some properties attached to it that are these same properties, these same functions, these same other objects associated with them. Okay, questions? Great question, Dylan. Why would you use query selector? The idea behind query selector is to be a hammer and look at everything as a nail. So if you want to select a very specific tag like so, then you can use query selector. Another way people use it is they look for all inputs of, say, type equals text, because CSS has a way of defining it, but JavaScript does not, or HTML does not. So you have to use query selector. So in some places you have to, in other places you can just use it as a blunt tool. Either way, I personally don't use it that much. I prefer these functions because they're more specific, which means they're slightly faster. So if you have like a get element by ID, that's the fastest. Then there's getting by class name. Then there's getting by tag name. Then there's query selector in terms of how quick it's going to get something, because it's going to check that many things at a given time. Okay. We are jumping once more slightly into, I believe, one last part of today's lecture. So before we make that jump, any questions? Get them out now. Get them out of your system. Okay. I'm done playing with colors. Let's do one last thing. We're done. We're done with event listeners. So essentially, at this point, you have, I'll be honest, every tool you need to make your website responsive. We're done. You can leave this club now. Bye. You have every tool to make it with some difficulty. From here on out, we're trying to make things easy. There's just one last thing that can be a little bit annoying. And for that, we have to start with creating a list. I'm going to create a list item. Let's call it item 1. I don't want to be creative today. Item 2. And of course, item 3. Now, here there's only 3 items, but as you imagine in big websites, in like say Facebook, if everything is a list, then you have what? 30, 40, 50, 70 items at a time. Imagine going in and writing hitboxes and an event listener for everything. That's a lot of event listeners. That's going to slow you down substantially, because JavaScript is keeping an eye on like all of these things at the same time, waiting for one of them to trigger. It's not very efficient, and it's not very good in code writing, because you have to write something down either with a for loop multiple times or just explicitly that many times. Very bad. So JavaScript developed a way to figure this out. What they call it is event delegation. And the idea behind event delegation is that sometimes you want to just set a event listener on a bigger thing and then figure out what the smaller thing was. So you want to set an event listener on the list and not worry about the list. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's first start with simple. Go ahead, make a list, get the list out of our document by using, what are we gonna use today? I want to make it fast. I'm gonna give it the ID list as well. Get element by ID list. And now we have this UL element. Just for fun, let's quickly print out this list as well, just to make sure we're on the right track. Bada bing, bada boom. Yep, there we go. Super, super fun thing in console in basically every place now. You get these like drop downs to explore stuff. Very cool. Give it a shot whenever you have the time. Okay. Now Let's go ahead and add an event listener on list. There we go. With this event listener, we're gonna do, let's just say click and fire a function. That's nothing fancy, just says you clicked. Simple. Start simple. There we go. I just clicked 2, that works. I just click 1, that works. I click 3, that works. It works on everything. Excellent. But I did click 2, then 1, and then 3 distinctively. So how do we figure out which one is being clicked at any given moment? Right. For that, what we're going to do is we're going to use something called the variable event passed into our callback function. I'm going to abbreviate this to E. All right. What E does is, well, let's find out. Let's go ahead and print E every time every time a fireback happens. Let's go ahead. Let's go E, E, E. Well, it's returning this specific new thing that is known as the pointer event, which I assume most of us know nothing about, and it's this scary, horrifying thing. Ooh, okay, no, or whatever. It doesn't matter. But it's an object, and that's what we care about. And we can get certain values out of objects. So what we're going to start with is getting e.target. And e.target is basically saying, okay, this event happened. What was the target of this event? And therein lies the magic. So let's do that. Look at that. It's not the UL. It's not the entirety of the unordered list. It is item 3, then item 2, and then item 1. Because what was clicked was the list item, not the list itself. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go to the target and get its value out. And console.log that. Okay. So, whoops, I have made a mistake. It's not dot value. I'm wrong. It's dot inner text. Because the list item has no value. Only input boxes have values. Don't make my mistakes, folks. There we go. Item 1. Ooh, item 2. Item 3. This is something that is known as event delegation. So you can put an event listener on a bigger thing, figure out what the smaller thing was, and then do whatever you want. For example, you can go ahead and do like e.target.style.background color to red. And that's going to do something very cool where it goes in and it says this to red, this to red, this to red. So like checking things off like a grocery list online, that's how you do it. Okay. Questions? Don't have any questions, then we're done for today. Congratulations. Yeah, you have learned web development. Goodbye. But stick around anyway because we're going to do fun things after this. But yeah, now you have the tools to do basically whatever you want with your website. You can put in event listers here, there, everywhere, and make your website pop and look fancy and look responsive and take you to a sign-up page and scam people for money. Do whatever you want. The web is now your domain. All right. Thank you for being here today. If you have any questions, I'm sticking around for like 10 minutes, but otherwise, have a good day. Bye-bye.
Wait, really quickly, Arushi,
so-
you can introduce can you introduce the second project? That might help some people because I know there was some confusion last semester about what exactly was supposed to be happening in the second project.
Ooh, introduce the second project. Hold on, let me just.
Which, by the way, guys, is being released today and is due in a week. So you should listen if you can.
Get grinding, folks. I do not want to say anything that's incorrect. Let me just pull up some details about the second project. Anyone who's curious, hang around. Give me a second, though. Okay. Right, I believe the second project is the calculator, the iOS calculator. And the basic idea behind it is that you get to make a calculator. You get to use this responsive idea to get clickable buttons and then get that clickable button display up there, and then do some math out behind the scenes as well whenever an equals button is hit. More descriptions about that will be released today. I actually believe it's not released yet, which is why I'm not going into like intense detail about it. But the basic idea is that you want to use a lot of event listeners to trigger events and change things on the back end of the website, and change the display as that goes as well. All right. So Moritz, anything specific I need to introduce about the project that I may be missing?
Right, it's fine. I can just add like one or two more things. We'll be releasing it tonight. We were planning to release that for JavaScript 2, and it is JavaScript 2, so we're gonna release it.
Hey.
You guys should have learned everything you need now. It's a very download project. HTML, CSS, you guys should know how to do that by now, by creating a pretty simple function calculator. The JavaScript elements you're going to need though are basic logic. Things like linear data 8, you guys should just be able to know how to add things. But the really big dumb things you guys are going to need are being able to access when a button is clicked. So let's say when a number is clicked, you should be able to know that your JavaScript should know that, oh, a 9 was clicked or a plus was clicked or whatever. And your logic does all the fancy stuff, which is admittedly slightly complicated, but given the time, I would say this project should ideally take 3 to 4 hours. Should be doable, and being able to display that result on the screen. So really the DOM element here are just knowing what was clicked out of like a very small amount of buttons and displaying information. But yeah, you guys should have everything you need in your toolbox. And I would recommend starting early though, just because it is a conceptually difficult project compared to what you've done so far.
I would agree with that notion. And this lecture is pretty crucial in figuring out how that clicking thing works. So do use the notion and all of those things to the best of your ability. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Summer. And with that, anyone who wants to stick around for questions, I'm here. Otherwise, have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
I had a quick question.